So first things first, who are you? What's your role? And where do you work?
My name is Reid Vandewiele. I have the product lead role right now. I recently transitioned from an engineering position, but I'm the product lead for StormForge, and we do automated right-sizing for pods and Kubernetes.
What are 3 Kubernetes emerging tools that you are keeping an eye on?
I don't know if you call them emerging tools, but 3 technologies that I'm paying attention to right now are DRA and in-place pod resizing. Those are both directly relevant. We're very focused on what we do, so that's kind of directly relevant to what we're paying attention to. I'm also paying attention to FinOps has a FOCUS specification, which is an open specification for normalizing cloud usage data. And they're about to add shared cost allocation to the spec. And so I'm paying attention to that right now because Kubernetes is a shared cost typically when you're paying attention to bills.
Now, our podcast guest, Ben, is not a huge fan of Helm because you don't necessarily know what changes will result in. What's your experience with Helm, and do you share similar concerns?
So my experience with Helm is prior to the role I'm in right now, I was responsible for maintaining StormForge's Helm chart for distributing our software to on-prem customers. I have a mixed relationship with Helm. I actually think it's a great tool for some use cases. If you're a software vendor and you want to deliver a piece of software to somebody else, it allows you to create a user experience that can be simplified and kind of tailored down. The problem with Helm, it's kind of like C++ back in the old days. As long as you know what not to do with Helm, I think Helm is great. But it's one of those things where I only fell in love with it after I realized how many things I really should never try to do with it. I needed to keep it very simple.
Now, another guest of ours, T-Bolt, said, before we had the vertical pod autoscaler, resource management was a nightmare. What is your experience with resource management challenges before implementing automation?
Yeah. So, I guess we have an interesting relationship with that because we do automated right sizing is kind of the focus of what we do. But before we had our own tool, auto sizing us, we used cluster autoscaler for cluster, right sizing, but we didn't have anything for vertical. And so we had a lot of different deployments, for our customers. We're basically like a managed service provider in a way. So we have one stack per customer, and every customer is unique. What the utilization of our stack was for each customer, we have people who have, hundreds of clusters and thousands of nodes, that we're kind of automating, systems for. And we have people who are doing a free trial who have one kind cluster on their laptop. The usage profiles are vastly different. Prior to automation, we basically had to pick a t-shirt size for kind of the standard across the board and then manually respond when we noticed something was going wrong in kind of our larger clusters as people kind of ramped up their usage. So mostly what that manifested as was cost, right? Because you're always going to take the tack of, I want it to be reliable. And I know that if I at least size it big enough, then it's going to be mostly okay. But then you've got a lot of developer time still in going through and kind of playing whack-a-mole when things go wrong.
T-Bolt also believes that auto-scaling is great because it provides the relevant trade-offs, allowing you to fine-tune for good stability, efficiency, and response time. What's your advice on auto-scaling Kubernetes clusters?
I think I first want to say Thibaut's interview was really interesting because he was describing a problem that occurred as a result of his auto-scaling, his VPA going haywire for a little bit. But he was still a big fan of auto-scaling. And that's basically the main thing I would suggest to people and advise in a nutshell is it is still work. You're never going to completely get out of the business of paying attention to resource utilization, but auto-scaling lets you put it on autopilot. Autopilot's actually a great analogy too, because like if you're cruising down the highway, autopilot, cruise control, that's great. You can't stop paying attention, but it's going to allow you to focus on many more things. I would say advice for people, looking at auto-scaling. There's 3 dimensions to it. There's cluster autoscaling, there's horizontal autoscaling, there's vertical autoscaling. Pay attention to all 3. There's great solutions out there, open source, especially for cluster autoscaling. Carpenter is pretty amazing. We've had a lot of people having great success with that. VPA or CADA and HPA are obviously very mature at this point. The vertical is a little trickier. Like that's why we're trying to make it simpler for people, but all 3 dimensions can bring you value. Even though, and it's not magic, you still have to pay attention. But it's worth paying. It's worth looking into.
Now, Kubernetes turned 10 years old last year. What can we expect in the next 10 years to come?
Oh, geez. Yeah, that's a great question. I'm one of those guys who's like laser focused on what I'm doing right now. So I haven't kind of popped my head up to look that far, in a little while. But if I were to hazard a guess, I really hope that what they've kind of buckled down on is complexity. Kubernetes is incredibly powerful. The model, the distributed kind of complex, systems, is really interesting and from a computer science background engaging. But especially with AI kind of coming onto the scene, I think that what we're going to see is hopefully a lot of these things we were talking about autoscaling a second ago. That's a little bit complicated to pay attention to. I'm hoping that as Kubernetes matures, a lot of this becomes the complexity cost is ratcheted lower and lower as time moves on.
How can people get in touch with you?
Probably the best way is LinkedIn, honestly. I don't know my LinkedIn off the top of my head. Reid Vandewiele. I'm pretty easy to find. There's not a lot of that combination of names out there. I don't pay attention to social media much, so LinkedIn is best, or you can probably find my email on the company website. I currently work for StormForge.
And last thing, can we actually add to as well? Can you say what's next for StormForge?
What's next for StormForge? So StormForge in April was acquired by CloudBolt. So we used to do just focused right sizing. So we paid attention to the nuts and bolts of CPU and memory usage, and we're like looking at GPU and stuff. GPU is kind of the next big thing for us next quarter. But we're also, whenever we talk to people about right sizing, they also want to know about, well, how much is it costing me? What is the effect? The CloudBolt merger gives us access to billing data, and so the next thing for StormForge is probably combining all of that. So not only are we going to automate right sizing as we can, but we're going to be able to actually give you reporting on what that's actually costing you in terms of real dollars.